Hello everyone. It is Neverman, and today I have a very different video that I will be doing. So instead of this being a more informative video like my videos usually are, I have decided that after a few recent experiences, I'm going to just have a full-fledged conversation about how much I dislike a specific Pokemon in this game. And I'm sure if you can recognize the creature that is in my current background, you already know who I'm going to be talking about. Yes, it is in fact Hatterene. Now, from an actual physical design standpoint, I have no issues with Hatterene as a Pokemon whatsoever. It's completely fine Pokemon. We are not discussing that. We will be discussing why I dislike this Pokemon very much, no matter what type I'm using, no matter which metagame I'm playing. It could be OU, it could be Broken Cup, it could be Monotype, it does not matter. I absolutely despise seeing this mon. It's my least favorite Pokemon to play against in the entire game, and it's not even remotely close. Peak Toxapex was nowhere near as annoying as this mon for me. And that might sound absolutely insane to some people, but I'll explain in a bit. Just so you guys are aware, I will also be putting on replays of me in the background after I do my first brief explanation before I keep ranting, so that way you guys don't get completely bored to death of just looking at the same screen, because I do not have replays that I have offhand to really show why I dislike this Pokemon, but my explanations should be enough. And yeah, I have a lot to say about why I dislike this Pokemon, so let's just get into the very basics. Let's just talk about the typing and stats of Hatterene. So, right off the bat, nothing too crazy stat-wise besides its special attack. It has extremely low speed, rivaling arguably the Slow Twins, I believe. It's actually very slow in terms of that, but yes, it is incredibly slow. It's meant to be some sort of bulky attacker. Some sort of bulky setup sweeper, if you will. Which isn't an entirely uncommon thing. We've had plenty of bulky setup sweepers before, like Suicune, for example. There's also a couple of others, like I think Gen 2 Raikou is also like a bulky setup sweeper, except that thing is really fast. But, I mean, if that thing was slow, it probably would do the same-ish things. The idea behind these slow setup sweepers is that they usually just get to set up for a couple of turns, and they act as like late game win conditions where you aren't able to stop them after they get a couple of boosts. Suicune, again, is the most notable doer of this, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones as well. But yeah, these bulky setup sweepers are typically very dangerous. Actually, Volcarona is also another one, but Volcarona is kind of just its own thing. But yeah. Suicune will just use Calm Mind a bunch of times, and then eventually be able to out-sustain any damage it can take, and then just sweep teams using its one singular attack. Hatterene, on the other hand, is a bit different in terms of this archetype. So yeah, before I get into that, let's just focus a little bit more on the stats and typing. So, Psychic Fairy is a very decent typing. It's weak to mainly Poison and Steel, and it has a decent amount of resistances, most notably Quad, resistant to fighting. But yeah, it's neutral to a lot of stuff. It's not exactly the most amazing typing in the world, but it's fairly okay. Now, the issue with Hatterene is that this typing, offensively, is actually fairly decent as long as you're not into a Steel type. Because Fairy and Psychic actually cover each other's weaknesses relatively well. Psychic hits those dangerous poison types really hard, and Fairy hits the dark types that Psychic is afraid of very hard. So, yes, Psychic and Fairy are actually very complementary to each other. However, they both compound their helplessness against Steel. And we'll talk about Steel and its matchups in a bit with this Mon. But yeah. The typing itself is actually not that bad. It has a lot of neutralities. The only issue is that this typing, with it being a bulky Seb Sweeper, means that essentially it can very well, on both types that it's on, just end up being a complete 1v6 destroyer of worlds after a couple of Combine boosts. Now, especially in Monotype, having this thing on Fairy and being imagine you're a poison team and you're playing against Fairy and you see this Mon, you have to constantly make sure that this Mon does not get set up ever, otherwise you completely lose the game. And thankfully you do have a couple of Pokemon that are good at dealing with this Mon, but this Mon still puts a massive strain on your entire team because you have to constantly play around making sure this thing doesn't do any progress or get any progress at all. Because a couple of Combine boosts and your entire team is completely gone. Or even if it isn't completely gone, you will lose a very important wall or a very important Pokemon, and it will not be pretty. So yeah. But now that I've described its typing and we've taken a look at its stats, and like I said, the stats aren't really all that. They're very Suicune-esque. It's just incredibly slow. It has an alright attack stat, but it's not that great. And special attack stat is also pretty good. 136 is actually not bad at all, but its defenses are where we're going to start having an issue. Because the defenses are actually decently high, despite its subpar HP. And if any of you have ever used Shuckle before, you will know that it doesn't matter if you have very little HP. If your defenses are high enough, you can just be a very bulky Mon that can take hits really well. And Hatterene is yet another example of this. Actually, Toxapex is also another great example of this, because Toxapex also notably has low HP, but Hatterene is an offensive Mon, and Toxapex is actually a wall. This is going to be... We're going to see why this is an issue in a bit, but yeah. I'm just gonna put on some replays, and then I'll start getting into it. But yeah. So, let's start off with the elephant in the room, which is the fact that Hatterene has Magic Bounce. Magic Bounce is the ability that allows it to swap, or not swap, but basically send back status moves, or most status moves, back to the user. Obviously not stuff like Memento, because Memento doesn't really allow you to do stuff like that. But yeah, Hatterene is able to essentially beat two weaknesses to its archetype with having this Magic Bounce ability. And those two weaknesses would be Roar and Whirlwind, allowing it to get forced out against its will. And the other being Taunt. Taunt stops most Setup Sweepers from being able to set up, and it leaves them... And this is usually used to get on a utility Pokemon, especially. And it allows the utility Pokemon to basically turn them into setup bait themselves, because most setup sweepers aren't really that strong naturally. Keyword, most. But they usually don't hit that hard naturally, so usually most utility Pokemon could just make use of their weakness and just taunt them. Imagine a Grimmsnarl, if you will, or a Sableye just taunting. And basically shutting down a Suicune before it can start setting up in front of it. But Hatterene completely blocks that, and in fact taunts them instead. Now, this is an issue for two reasons. The first reason is, like I said before, it's a setup sweeper, and not being able to get set up on, or not being able to get taunted as a setup sweeper is a very big boon. But the other issue is that this benefits Hatterene's team extremely well, and it also compounds with it being a setup sweeper as well. So if you have, for example, a lead that is dependent on using taunt first, to shut down your hazard lead, for example. So imagine, if you will, you're up against a Tinkaton, and you're playing, I don't know, Rock or some other type, and you want to try and taunt the Tinkaton from using Thunder Wave on your lead. You go for the taunt, except they switch into Hatterene immediately, and you get taunted instead. So now you not only can you not taunt Hatterene, but now you also can't use your hazards if you have any. So yeah, you basically get locked out of any of your utility moves, and you're basically forced to attack and not do a lot of damage to it, and now Hatterene is just free to click Calm Mind and start doing its nonsense. And yeah, that is one of the many disgusting situations that you can find yourself against when you're dealing with that Pokemon, because it is absolutely repulsive that it can do that. Imagine if Suicune was able to do that. That would be absolutely insane. But thankfully, it does not do that. But yeah, I really dislike the fact that Hatterene can do that. And the fact that it's on two types, where having that both types actually have hazard setters that actually do get affected by taunt relatively harshly. And because of both types being relatively harmed by said harshness, or not the harshness, but being affected by taunt that well, yeah, you would not really want that. So, for example, Fairy has two Mons. You have Tinkaton, and you also have Klefki, who you don't want to get taunted. So Hatterene basically just makes it so that those guys basically have a pseudo-taunt on their team, and can basically get away with playing really aggressively, which can be really annoying if you're on those types. Thankfully, however, Hatterene's typing will allow you to at least punish it, or so you think, because let's remember that it's also incredibly bulky. So now with those high HP numbers, we're gonna switch back to the replays in a sec. I just need to show this, but this set right here showcases the exact problem that Hatterene can do. So this set actually allows it to tank hits relatively well, and because you have 136 space special attack, you don't actually need to invest in that at all, because the Calm Mind boost that you will be able to get more of due to this spread will actually allow you to basically not need the high special attack, and you can just start one-shotting stuff while you're basically building, or not building, but you're basically set up to be a tank as a setup sweeper. So yeah, this is already a problem in itself, because typically setup sweepers still want, even most of them will go HP, but most of them will at least go like a little bit of special attack or something like that. This character, or this Pokemon, just refuses to do that. At least in Monotype. I'm not sure about other tiers, but in Monotype specifically, it does this, and it's really disgusting. Because this basically allows it to, you know, those super effective hits that it's not supposed to take? Turns out it can actually take them now. So, for example, if you are a, let's say, a Galarian Slowking, and you decide that you want to use Sludge Bomb against a Hatterene, the Sludge Bomb will go through and actually not do that much damage, unless you get the Poison chance, which you probably will get it, hopefully, but if you don't get it, you might be in a world of hurt, because now Hatterene is going to either nuzzle you or get a Calm Mind up on you, and then start Psyshocking you to death. And we don't need to talk about how Nuzzle can just completely flip games on their head because of how broken Paralysis is. But yeah, you will not have a good time dealing with it, because normally you would do a ton of damage to it, and Hatterene would not be able to actually just sit in front of you and be able to do that. But unfortunately, because of how bulky it is with this spread, it'll be able to do that. And Another issue, again, is that it has lower physical defense, so you would think you would hit it on the physical side, so it would do more damage, but you're actually better off hitting it on the special side, where it has the higher natural special bulk. But guess what? Cloudmine boosts its special defense, so if you are up against a +1 Hatterene, there's not really a very obvious or good place to hit them to actually make progress against it. You basically have to get it before it sets up, which requires very good play, or you already just basically sweeping the entire team. For example, you already have a +2 Caesar, there's not, even Hatterene can't really deal with that mon when it's +2. Unless it's on fairy, or not on fairy, unless it's on psychic, in which case it might be able to, but even then, it would still probably have a hard time. But yeah. It is incredibly annoying. We're going to go back to the replays, but yeah, the spread just makes it incredibly infuriating to actually deal with or check, because if you are an offensive team, let's say fighting or fire, if you will, if you're an offensive team and Hatterene gets a boost against you and you don't have enough firepower to actually knock it down in time, you will have to deal with getting Parahacks and then either getting Draining Kiss, so it getting Draining Kisses back to full HP, or you lose a very important Pokemon on your team as a result of its resulting Psy Shock. And that can be extremely obnoxious for a lot of reasons. But the main reason is definitely just that it's just incredibly infuriating to get hit by, or to just deal with. Because remember, you can't taunt this thing, and you basically have to play positioning really well. And I'm not saying that this mon is like the most broken thing in the metagame right now, I'm just saying that I personally hate dealing with it. That is something I would like to reiterate, is that I don't think this mon is completely unbeatable, it's just that the counterplay to it is very annoying. And it's also just very obnoxious to deal with for certain types. But that is the case for a lot of types in this game. Some types are just absolutely crushed by certain Pokemon. For example, Fairy has a hard time against Caesar, Brock has a hard time against Caesar as well. Some types get absolutely blown apart by Fluttermane, like Dark, for example, has a really hard time dealing with Fluttermane sometimes. They don't use a Sucker Punch, but yeah. Some types are going to be beaten by that, but my issue comes from Hatterene's competitive design as a whole. Because normally I don't really have a problem with a lot of Pokemon's competitive designs, like even Peak Toxapex, as annoying and frustrating as that Pokemon was, even Peak Toxapex wasn't that obnoxious. To me, at least. There's definitely stuff you could do, and there's like a bunch of creative sets that you were able to run to actually be able to destroy or just outright KO it. Like, for example, one of my favorites used to be Spiderweb Araquanid. Spiderweb would trap Toxapex, and you would be able to 1v1 it with Araquanid using, I think it was Infestation or some other thing. No, it was, actually, no, it was Soak and Toxic that you would use against it. And I believe the last move was Rest, so that if Toxapex decided to Toxic you, you would just not have to deal with it. And you couldn't get burnt because of Water Bubble. So, yeah, it was just... You were allowed to do some really insane stuff back then. And yes, you could say that having to run stuff like that is absurd. But to be fair, in Peak Toxapex times, walls were incredibly strong in general, and that set that I just mentioned could beat most walls in the game. So... It's not just Toxapex that's the issue, but yeah, enough about Toxapex. I just want to talk about how Hatterene is more infuriating than that mon ever was, because it's been doing the same thing forever. I think this mon was added in Gen 7, I believe. I want to say it was added in Gen 7, but I might be wrong about that. But yeah, that mon, Hatterene, is just very frustrating. Because it's very bulky, like I said before. It's immune to taunt, and bounces back. It makes playing lead games really hard. Because not only... Oh, I didn't even mention this in the lead section before, but... Yeah, if you want to try and set hazards as well, not even just use taunt, if you want to set hazards, you have to constantly play the 50-50 of whether or not the person's going to switch in to Hatterene and take advantage of your hazards. Because it doesn't even need to stay in and start calm minding to do that. It can just pivot in, block a spike on your Brambleghast, for example, and then you can just bait the Brambleghast into using a Poltergeist, but then you just switch into something that's immune to it. So, for example, if you're on Psychic, you go into... The person wants to use spikes on your Tinkaton, for example, because they think that they can get away with it. You swap into Hatterene, so Hatterene bounces back one of the spikes, and the person's just like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to use Poltergeist to try and destroy the Hatterene. Except you swap back out, and now you're into your Indeedee, and now Indeedee is set up terrain, and you're in a really bad spot. Because now Indeedee can just straight up one-shot you. But... even aside from Indeedee being able to one-shot you, now its Psychic Terrain is just up, and now you're in a really bad spot. So, yeah. That is just one of the many situations that Hatterene could put you in, and it's really obnoxious to deal with. But what really irks me about this mod is the fact that it just is able to calm mind as well as it does, and the fact that it also low-key sometimes, depending on the set, doesn't even have to worry about its main weakness, which is steel types. So steel types are definitely the biggest counter to Hatterene, because both of its stabs get resisted by it, and it has to rely on Mystical Fire instead of like Flamethrower or Fire Blast, and Mystical Fire isn't exactly that powerful, but you'll find that it gets the job done enough. To the point where it borderline may feel unwallable sometimes, but that's obviously not true. It is still able to be walled, especially with stuff like Hisuian Gudra. Hisuian Gudra absolutely clowns on Hatterene, it's actually not even funny. But other steel types, like Scizor for example, have to be scared of that. Because if you decide, oh, I'm gonna go straight into Scizor as a bug player, and you want to try and destroy Hatterene, you decide to go into Scizor and you think you'll be fine, pressing Sword Stance on it, because you're not choice banned, because you just want to sweep the entirety of the fairy team you're on, but then you get Mystical Fired and now you're in a rough spot. That's a frustrating situation that can happen, but even if, let's say, that doesn't happen, there's still also the Trick Room set, which has been gaining popularity. Now, the Trick Room set, I'll go back to the showdown tab for this, but the Trick Room set for Hatterene is a relatively new thing. This hasn't always been a thing. At least this generation, but this was definitely a thing back in Gen 7, Gen 8, but as of Gen 9, this is a more recent development. Mainly thanks to Waffle Copter, but yes, again, a lot of the same thing, huge defense investment, and it gets a paltry plus 8 special attack. But yes, it uses its dual stabs, and it uses Calm Mind, but it also uses Trick Room. And now, with Trick Room, it doesn't even have to worry about getting outsped. So if you had a Sneasler and you thought, as a fighting user, oh, I can just check Hatterene with my Sneasler at any time, I shouldn't be worried. Especially if it's choice band Sneasler, you probably think you'll be fine. And then, guess what? Hatterene decides that they are going to use Trick Room. And now for the next 4 turns, you cannot send in your Sneasler, otherwise you just lose the game. Same can be said for Poison, actually, who is also in a similar dilemma in that regard. And yeah, this Hatterene set can also afford to use Life Orb, because it and also run like a more offensive spread. But yeah, in general, this is just another set that just makes Hatterene unbearable. And Trick Room deserves its own section, because Trick Room basically, as I said before, it basically just flips the script. but you don't know if it's Trick Room or not, and you can't check, and you also can't taunt it from using Trick Room. So God forbid that you're against a Psychic, or not a Psychic, but a Fairy, actually no, Psychic team that has a Trick Room on it, or has multiple Trick Room mons that can abuse it. If you try to like force out the Trick Room, or even try to remove Hatterene from play somehow, too bad it's also immune to Dragon Tail, so you can't even phase it out with that. Just another thing to make sure that mon is undealable with, but yeah, it just you just can't stop it from using Trick Room, and it's just I don't know how. You have to basically play 50-50 of whether or not it's Trick Room, whether or not it's Nuzzle, whether or not it's Mystical Fire, and each of those different moves, each of those fourth moves in that slot can just completely flip the game, and you don't know which one it is because all of them can fit naturally on a Fairy team, because sometimes you can tell what set a certain Pokemon is based on its teammates. Like, for example, if you see a Dragon team with Dragapult, you might be able to figure out if it's physical or special based on the amount of physical or special attackers on the Dragon team. So, for example, if there's a Latios and a Raging Bolt on the Dragon team, you can possibly surmise that, yes, the Dragapult is probably going to be physical. And if it's vice versa, if you see that the Dragon team has a Roaring Moon and another strong physical attacker, Garchomp, for example, you can surmise that Dragapult will probably be special. You do not have such luxury or even remotely anything similar if you have a Psychic team or a Fairy team with Hatterene, because Hatterene is actually an OTR user. It can just be the sole user of Trick Room on the team, and it will still get a lot of work done because of how incredibly powerful it can be in that field. And that's really annoying. It's very annoying to deal with. And as someone who uses a lot of offensive teams, and I do like offensive teams and balanced teams, but the problem is that Hatterene can just absolutely crush both of them because of how unbelievably frustrating it is with its multitude of sets, and once again, Paralysis is really obnoxious. So it having Nuzzle does not help at all, and it just allows it, and even in matchups where it might not be useful, which would be like against the entirety of Steel, for example, it can still use Nuzzle on something like Archaludon, and you could just get Parahacks really bad, and you would think like, oh, Hatterene can't do anything this game. But if it does that to your Archaludon, or even your Hisuian Goodra, you can just lose the game off of one bad Paraturn. And Hatterene would be able to do that because it could just afford to sacrifice itself for that, and it's... oh my god, it's so aggravating. It's so aggravating how this mon can just do so much against any type. It's really... It truly is one of the most annoying Pokemon ever. Like, just ever designed, in my opinion. Because I've played competitive Pokemon for a really long time. I've played since Gen 6. There have been absolute nonsense in this game. Like Mega Sableye, for example. Mega Sableye, I am so glad that Pokemon is gone. That thing is almost as obnoxious as Hatterene, because it is a wall that cannot get toxic, cannot get taunted, and just has... it used to have 16 recovery uses, had Protect, could set up and sweep on you, kind of like Hatterene, but it wasn't as good at that as Hatterene is, because this typing wasn't as good as that. It wasn't as good at doing that with that typing. And it also could get hit by Dragon Tail, so it was able to get somewhat phased out. But yeah, that mon was really obnoxious, and that thing was designed to be a wall. Not to mention that its pre-mega ability was also Prankster, so God forbid you try to do a 50-50 play on it. trying to guess whether or not it's going to use his magic bounce or he's going to use his prankster, and you just lose the 50-50. It was annoying. That mon was also really obnoxious, but that mon could not do what current Hatterene can do. It couldn't use Trick Room to completely flip the script on your team. It couldn't, and it also had the Mega as well in order to do that. So you can't just, from turn 1, just start playing a 50-50 at the lead. You'd have to lead with Sableye, which can be played around more than Hatterene, in my opinion. Because if we take an example like, I know this is like the most super relevant thing ever, but Lycanroc Dusk with Stealth Rock, for example, as a lead on Dark, or not on Dark, on Rock. If we did that, example, you could, if you led with Sableye, and I led with Lycanroc Dusk, I would know, okay, he's trying to block my thing, he's going to Mega here, so I can just swap into something that can probably beat it, like I actually have no idea what on Rock back then could probably beat it. Maybe a Z Dazzling Gleam, Nihilego. So yeah, you could just go into that and then decide that you're going to beat up Mega Sableye there. Like, you could at least play around that somewhat. You probably are going to get knocked off, but you wouldn't take that much knockoff damage because you have the Sea Crystal, but yeah, that's just an example. It's not the greatest example, but it paints a picture of how you can, like, at least attempt to play around with that. In that same example, if you are the Lycanroc into Hatterene, you cannot know whether or not it's going to set up, because on turn 1, it already is going to block your stuff. So you have to either switch out, or you have to predict it switching out, which is just an insane thing to call out. And not really hugely realistic, because if you get the call out wrong, you just set up rocks on yourself, and Hatterene just gets a free turn, which is just not good. So yeah, it's just annoying. It's just really annoying. And sorry if I'm sounding like super whiny in this video, but like I genuinely just need to get this off my chest because I cannot stand this mon. I genuinely cannot stand it. But yeah. Yeah, there's a reason why even when I build Psychic and Fairy teams, I try not to use it, and it's because I just dislike the mon that much that I try not to use it, because it just makes me really upset watching me do it. Granted, I do still have Psychic and Fairy teams with Hatterene on it, because that mon is as good as it is. But yeah, if I'm able to skip out on using it, I will try to skip out on using it. But yeah, no, it's a very good mon, and it's very frustrating to deal with. I just can't with it. But all of this is to say one last thing that I dislike about Hatterene, and it is definitely the types that it's on can just support it really, really well. This is exclusive to bottom type and not so much the other tiers, but even in other tiers, it also can just have really good teammates as well that can support it really well. Because Hatterene with good support, imagine screen support on any of the defensive Hatterene sets, or even the offensive ones that have like full special attack, full HP. You can just have a screen's teammate just make you bulkier, and even on the defensive variants it makes you even more bulky. So like, if you have screens on Psychic, for example, you can just completely make Hatterene just an unstoppable character. Or on Fairy, same thing with Klefki, you can do the same thing. And once again, both screen setters are helped because of the fact that you can't get taunted, because if they do, they're risking Hatterene coming in and getting the taunt on them instead and giving Hatterene a free turn, which is just not good. So the problem is the burden, and this is the biggest problem I have with it. Hatterene just puts a massive burden on the opponent. The user of the Hatterene doesn't really have to do that much, because the opponent is constantly thinking about it. And this is an issue I have with Hisuian Zoroark as well, but it's not as bad because that mon isn't as broken, or isn't as destructive as it could be. But the burden is on you, the opponent of the Hatterene, to play around it. And a lot of Pokemon are like this, but the issue with Hatterene is that it's unique in that it has all of these other disgustingly broken features, like not being able to get phased out by Whirlwind, it being able to just end entire games after a couple of Combine boosts, and just being very hard to take down naturally, and having Draining Kiss, which allows it to heal itself for an insane amount because of the 75% healing on Draining Kiss's drain effect. Which, yeah, that is one of its biggest problems, is the fact that Draining Kiss just gets to heal it a lot. But even against teams that can't heal a lot against it, it's still doing a lot with Psychic and even a regular Fairy move, like Dazzling Gleam. So it just does so much, and it puts so much pressure on you, the opponent, and the user of the Hatterene doesn't even really have to do that much. They could just play normally and not even have to think about using the Hatterene, but the opponent is constantly having to make all these plays, because if they make one wrong play, Hatterene just gets a ton of progress off and can just completely ruin your entire game plan. Like, the lead example is just one of many, and then you have the trying to check it example, which you can just, it's just hard to check sometimes. But thankfully, it is on two types that have very common weaknesses, and don't have, it has decent support for itself, but the types that they're on can't really support themselves that well, if that makes sense. So Psychic is still going to have a lot of issues dealing with Ghost and Dark, and Fairy's going to have a lot of issues dealing with Steel specifically. Poison not as much, but Steel is definitely still an issue for Fairy to deal with. And hold on, let me get another replay going. But yeah, Steel is just another very obnoxious thing to use, or not to use, but to deal with for Fairy teams. And Hatterene doesn't exactly solve that issue, but like I said before with the Arcaludon example, it can still just be a massive problem and do a lot, and just be really obnoxious, even when it's useless. So all I have to say about Hatterene is that it just really frustrates me whenever I have to play against it, because I do like playing offense and certain types of bulky offense or balance, and anytime I see Hatterene on the enemy team, it's just, I have to play so many mind games, make so many assumptions, have to think about whether or not it will get KO'd or not by super strong hits because of its bulk. It's very annoying to play around. And it's definitely my least favorite Pokemon to deal with, because at least with Toxapex you could taunt it, at least with Mega Sableye you could, I mean, that mon was still broken, I'm not trying to downplay that mon was absolutely broken, but at least with Mega Sableye you could still do some of the typical wall busting stuff, which would be using a setup sweeper, or your own Magic Bounce mon, or targeting its one weakness, which is Fairy, because it still would be able to get taken down, but yeah, it depended on who your Fairy user was, because if it was a physical attacker, you might have been out of luck because of Will-O-Wisp, but yeah. Yeah, but at least with Mega Sableye you could still set up against it and beat it like any other wall. It's also still weak to hazards. Even though it can block them, you can still like try to outplay it. But Hatterene, and remember, Mega Sableye was before they added heavy duty boots. Hatterene has heavy duty boots, or can use heavy duty boots, so it doesn't even need to have leftovers or anything like that. So it can just avoid the hazard problem that Mega Sableye had to deal with. And it's like, yeah, that's just really obnoxious. And, yeah, it's just... The Mon just gets away with putting so much burden on the player, or on the opponent, without much having to be done by the user. Because, like, as I said before, Hisuian Zoroark does a lot of the same thing, but Hisuian Zoroark is a very frail, very exploitable special attacker or physical attacker. But Hatterene is just a very bulky win condition that can just win off of one good turn. And that's what really makes it more obnoxious to me than any other substitute in the game, or any other fast offensive threat in the game that forces you to play 50-50s. Because Raging Bolt is also another really dangerous Mon, actually. That forces you to play its game. You either get Thunderclapped or get Thunderbolted, or you get hit by the Draco Meteor. And you have to play those annoying games too. But again, you have stuff like Psychic Drain, you have stuff like... You have some ground types that can actually deal with its Draco Meteor and can be tech to deal with it. And it doesn't just start doing this pressure from turn 1, it has to take time to do it. But sometimes you don't have such a luxury, and it can be really brutal. And yeah, I really just dislike how much control of the game Hatterene has, and you just don't have to think about it a lot. It really, really bugs there. But yeah, with that all being said, I think I will stop ranting for now and just close out the video with just my TLDR of why I hate Hatterene. It's too tanky, it's too explosive for when it gets one turn. It's very similar to Volcarona, like not that out of control with how quickly it can turn over a game, but yeah, it's very similar in how it can just turn over a game with one bad turn. But unlike Volcarona, it doesn't have its multitude of weaknesses, and its typing is just allows it to not be phased out by Dragon Tail, and it's just, yeah. But yes, the official TLDR. I'm going to try and stop ranting. I'm going to try and finish saying this. Hatterene is too bulky, has too many different types of sets that can change the entire game, is too useful even when it's not supposed to be, and it just makes too much progress all at once. On turn 1 of the game, Hatterene has far too much pressure and far too much impact in a majority of matches, and I genuinely do not like that. Especially when the user isn't really burdened to actually have to use Hatterene, because the opponent is the one that actually has the burden of having to think about playing around that Mon. The person using it doesn't have to think about it. And having all of those traits together in one Pokemon, because these are all traits that separately are scattered across different types of Pokemon in this game, but having all of those together is what really irks me with Hatterene. So yeah, I really, really dislike that Mon, and I'm going to close out the video because yes, this Mon really, really drives me insane, like truly insane. But yeah, that will be it for this video. Hopefully we'll have something a little more lighthearted next week, possibly a update on how I'm doing with my challenge, which I'm still trying to do right now. Still haven't gotten very far. I think I'm in 1400 still right now, but yeah, soon I will have an update for you guys on that, and I will also try and see if there's any other teams I can do a type review on. I might do some retrospectives on the types that I have been using, and just get my thoughts on how they fare in the metagame as a low tier type. So yeah, Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.